Woman helps lost elderly woman in subway and receives a surprise from her millionaire son. Amanda Wilson watched the people around her in the last car of the New York City subway, trying not to think about the job interview she was already late for. That's when she noticed an elderly woman who looked visibly distressed, gripping the handrail with trembling hands. "I need to get back home before he notices," the woman murmured repeatedly, glancing around with a confused expression. Amanda hesitated for a moment. No one else seemed to notice the woman's desperation. Everyone was either absorbed in their smartphones or avoiding eye contact, as was common on the Big Apple's subway. The next stop was hers for the job interview at Mount Sinai Hospital, an opportunity she couldn't afford to miss after 6 months of unemployment. The 32-year-old nurse took a deep breath and, against her better judgment, approached the elderly woman. "Are you okay? Can I help you with something?" Amanda asked, lightly touching the woman's shoulder. The woman turned to her with frightened eyes, a faded blue that contrasted with her time-worn fair skin. I don't know where I'm going," she replied in a fragile voice. "Do you know where my home is?" Amanda felt a pang in her chest. Her nurse's intuition immediately recognized the signs. It could be dementia, Alzheimer's, or simply the effect of strong medication. The subway slowed as it approached the station where Amanda was supposed to get off. "Where do you live? Do you have any ID or a contact phone in your purse?" Amanda asked, already knowing she would miss her interview. "My purse," the woman murmured, looking at the small leather bag she carried. "Yes, there must be something in here." The subway stopped at Union Square. The doors opened, and Amanda watched her job opportunity slip away as she stayed by the woman's side. Some passengers exited, others hurried in, and soon the doors closed again. "My name is Mrs. Dorothy," the elderly woman said suddenly, seeming momentarily lucid. "But I can't remember my last name now. Strange, isn't it?" Amanda smiled gently, trying to hide her concern. "That's all right, Mrs. Dorothy. Let's try to figure out where you live. May I look in your purse?" The woman nodded, handing over the brown leather bag. As the subway moved toward the next station, Amanda carefully unzipped it and began examining the contents. Inside was an embroidered handkerchief, some cash, an old lipstick, several yellowed black and white photographs, and a golden brooch with small stones that looked genuine. But no ID, wallet, or phone that could identify her. "These are lovely photos, Mrs. Dorothy. Is this you here?" Amanda asked, showing one of the pictures featuring a young woman standing beside a well-dressed man. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us as we're just starting out. Now back to the story. "Yes, that's me and Richard," Mrs. Dorothy replied, her eyes suddenly misty. "My Richard, he always said I was the most precious jewel in his collection." "Is Richard your husband?" "He was. He passed away 5 years ago," the woman said, her expression shifting back to confusion. "Or was it 10? I can't remember anymore. Since then, everything has been so strange." The subway slowed again as it neared the next station. "Let's get off here and find some help, Mrs. Dorothy," Amanda suggested, gently holding the woman's arm. "No!" Mrs. Dorothy exclaimed, suddenly agitated. "I need to go home. He'll be furious if he finds out I left alone." "Who will, Mrs. Dorothy?" The elderly woman glanced around as if afraid someone might hear. "My son, Edward. He doesn't like it when I go out alone. Says it's dangerous, that I might get lost. And look, he was right." Amanda felt a chill. Something about how Mrs. Dorothy mentioned her son didn't seem natural. "Do you remember your home address, ma'am?" Mrs. Dorothy furrowed her brow, concentrating hard. "It's a big house, with a garden of red roses. It's in—" She stopped, frustrated. "I can't remember the neighborhood name, but I know it's far from here." "It's okay," Amanda reassured her. "We'll stay together and figure it out." The next few hours required patience and persistence. Amanda took Mrs. Dorothy to a cafe inside Times Square station, where she bought them both a snack, using the little money she had set aside for the day. As they ate, she tried to gather more information, but the elderly woman wavered between moments of clarity and total confusion. During one of those lucid moments, Mrs. Dorothy gripped Amanda's hand with surprising strength. You're very kind. Dear, you remind me of my Margaret when she was young. Who is Margaret, Mrs. Dorothy? Margaret was my best friend. We grew up together in Rochester before I moved to New York City when I married Richard, the older woman explained, with a precision that surprised Amanda. I was 22 when I came here. Richard was already a promising businessman in construction. This detail gave Amanda hope. Maybe she could identify the woman's last name if she kept talking about her husband. And what did Mr. Richard build? Oh, all sorts of things. He started with affordable homes, then commercial buildings. Before he retired, Blackwell Construction was one of the biggest in New York City, she said with evident pride. Blackwell, so you're Dorothy Blackwell? Amanda asked, excited by the discovery. Mrs. Dorothy's face lit up briefly, then darkened again. Yes, I'm Dorothy Blackwell, widow of Richard Blackwell, mother of Edward Blackwell. She whispered the last name as if it were a painful secret. Edward Blackwell, Amanda repeated, trying to recall if she'd heard the name before. Mrs. Dorothy, do you have his phone number? We can call him to come get you. No, the older woman exclaimed with a vehemence that startled Amanda. I don't want to go back yet. He'll lock me up again. Lock you up? What do you mean? Amanda asked, concerned. But Mrs. Dorothy had already slipped back into confusion, scanning the passers-by as if searching for a familiar face. Amanda realized she needed help. She considered taking Mrs. Dorothy to a police station, but something in the woman's story made her hesitate. Instead, she decided to do a quick search on her phone, which was nearly out of battery. Richard, Blackwell Construction, New York City, she typed into the search bar. Several results appeared, confirming the existence of Blackwell Construction, founded in the 70s and now part of a larger conglomerate. There were also articles about Richard. Blackwell's passing 6 years prior, leaving a considerable fortune to his wife Dorothy and their only son Edward. A recent photo showed Edward Blackwell at a charity event. A stern-looking man in his 50s, with neatly trimmed grey hair and an impeccable suit. The caption mentioned he had taken over the family business after his father's death and expanded the Blackwell real estate empire. There was no doubt the disoriented woman Amanda was helping was the widow of one of New York City's wealthiest businessmen, and her son was a powerful, influential figure. Amanda felt the weight of responsibility grow heavier. On one hand, she should contact Edward Blackwell immediately about his mother. On the other, Mrs. Dorothy's words about being locked up unsettled her. Mrs. Dorothy, Amanda said gently, do you remember where your house is? Which neighborhood? The elderly woman seemed to snap out of her thoughts. Upper East Side, she answered with surprising clarity. A big house on Magnolia Avenue, number 287. It's the only one with a Golden Gate. Amanda Wilson sighed in relief. They finally had a destination. Shall we go there then? Mrs. Dorothy hesitated, but finally agreed with a small nod. The trip to the Upper East Side was long. They had to take the subway to the nearest station and then a taxi, which Amanda paid for using almost all the money she had set aside for the week. During the ride, Mrs. Dorothy alternated between periods of absolute silence and disjointed conversations, sometimes calling Amanda by the name Margaret and telling stories from her youth. When they finally arrived at the address, Amanda was impressed. It was an imposing mansion surrounded by high walls with security cameras. The famous Golden Gate gleamed under the afternoon sun. Is this really the place? Amanda confirmed. Mrs. Dorothy looked at the house with an unreadable expression. Yes, it's my golden prison, she murmured. Amanda pressed the intercom, suddenly feeling nervous. After a few seconds, a man's voice answered. Blackwell Family Residence. Good afternoon, my name is Amanda Wilson. I'm with Mrs. Dorothy Blackwell. I found her lost on the subway and she gave me this address. There was a moment of silence, followed by a muffled exclamation. Soon after, the gate began to open automatically. Please come in, said the voice, now noticeably agitated. Amanda guided Mrs. Dorothy along the stone path that cut through an immaculately kept garden. Before they even reached the front door, it opened, revealing a middle-aged man Amanda recognized from photos, Edward Blackwell. When he saw his mother, his face showed a mix of relief and irritation. Mom, we've been worried sick, he exclaimed, hurrying to support the elderly woman. To Amanda's surprise, Mrs. Dorothy seemed to shrink in her son's presence. "I'm sorry, Edward. I just wanted some fresh air," she replied, suddenly submissive. Edward turned his attention to Amanda, scrutinizing her from head to toe with a calculating look. "And you are—" "Amanda Wilson, I'm a nurse. I found your mother confused on the subway and decided to help her get home." "A nurse?" he repeated with renewed interest. "And how exactly did you find my mother?" Amanda briefly explained the encounter on the subway, omitting Mrs. Dorothy's troubling words about being locked up. "I see," said Edward, his tone now softer. "Well, you have my gratitude for bringing my mother home safely. We are very careful with her, especially since she started having these episodes." "Episodes?" Amanda asked. "Mom suffers from early-stage senile dementia," Edward explained with a sigh that seemed rehearsed. "The doctors recommend she doesn't go out alone, but sometimes she manages to slip past the caregivers. Isn't that right, Mom?" Mrs. Dorothy didn't answer, keeping her eyes fixed on the ground. "Well, I'm glad I could help," Amanda said, feeling increasingly uncomfortable. "I think I should go now." "Don't be in such a hurry," Edward interjected with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Come have some coffee with us. It's the least I can offer after all your help." Amanda wanted to refuse, but something in Mrs. Dorothy's pleading look made her accept. "All right, thank you." They entered the mansion, an impressive place with high ceilings, a marble staircase, and furniture that looked like museum pieces. A woman in uniform quickly appeared. "Betty, take my mother to rest," Edward ordered, "and bring some coffee for our guest in the library." "Yes, sir," replied the maid, approaching Mrs. Dorothy. Before being led away, the elderly woman tightly grasped Amanda's hand. "Thank you, my dear, you have a good heart." There was something in Mrs. Dorothy's gaze that seemed to convey more than her words could express. But before Amanda could understand, the maid was already leading her away. "This way, miss," Edward indicated, guiding Amanda to a grand library with shelves stretching from floor to ceiling. "Your home is incredible," Amanda remarked, trying to fill the uncomfortable silence. "A family inheritance." "My father had good taste," Edward replied, motioning for her to take a seat in an armchair. "So, you're a nurse?" "Yes, I graduated 7 years ago." "And what were you doing on the subway in the middle of the afternoon? Shouldn't you be working?" he asked, his tone sounding more like an interrogation than casual conversation. Amanda hesitated, but decided to be honest. "I'm currently unemployed. In fact, I missed a job interview today to help your mother." Something flickered in Edward's eyes. "Is that so? What an interesting coincidence." The maid entered with a tray of coffee and delicate cookies, briefly interrupting their talk. When she left, Edward leaned forward, studying Amanda with renewed intensity. "You know, I've been looking for a private nurse for my mother, someone who can keep an eye on her 24/7 to prevent her from escaping again." He paused deliberately. "Perhaps fate put you in our path for a reason." Amanda nearly choked on her coffee. "Are you offering me a job?" "I'm considering the possibility. The salary would be extremely generous, of course. 3 times what you'd earn at any hospital. In the city. Plus accommodation here in the mansion, meals and all benefits." The offer was tempting, especially for someone who had been job hunting for months. But something about the dynamic between Edward and his mother left Amanda uneasy. "Tessa, that's very kind of you, Mr. Blackwell, but—" "Edward, please," he interrupted with a calculated smile. "And don't answer now. Think about the offer. Here's my card." He handed her an elegant business card with his name and number. "I promise you won't regret it. Mom clearly took a liking to you, which is rare. She doesn't trust people easily." Amanda accepted the card, slipping it into her purse. "I'll think it over," she promised. After finishing her coffee, Amanda prepared to leave. She had hoped to say goodbye to Mrs. Dorothy, but Edward informed her she was resting and shouldn't be disturbed. "I'll call tomorrow for your answer about the job," he said, walking her to the gate. "All right, thank you again for the offer." As the taxi Edward had called for her drove away from the mansion, Amanda couldn't stop thinking about Mrs. Dorothy and the strange atmosphere of that house. The job offer was tempting, especially given her desperate financial situation, but something in her gut warned her to be cautious. When she arrived at her small apartment in Brooklyn, Amanda collapsed onto her bed, exhausted. The day had taken a completely unexpected turn. She'd lost one job interview, but gained another offer that paid far more. So why did she feel so unsettled? Mrs. Dorothy's words echoed in her mind, "He'll lock me up again." And the elderly woman's sudden change in behavior around her son was disturbing. Amanda grabbed her phone and typed "Blackwell Family New" York City into the search bar, determined to learn more about the people she'd just met. The next few hours were spent researching everything she could about the Blackwell family. She discovered that Richard Blackwell had not only been a successful builder, but also a respected philanthropist, having founded several charities. Dorothy, his wife, was known for her volunteer work with underprivileged children and seniors, having received numerous awards for her social engagement. Edward, however, had a very different reputation. Though he was considered a brilliant businessman, there were rumors about questionable practices in his dealings. Some articles mentioned that he had completely shifted the company's focus after his father's death, abandoning social projects to concentrate solely on high-end developments. The most intriguing part was the scarce news about Dorothy after her husband's passing. It was as if she had vanished from public life. The last photo of her at a social event dated back nearly 5 years ago, shortly after Richard's death. Amanda was so absorbed in her research that she startled when her phone rang. It was an unknown number. "Hello," she answered hesitantly. "Amanda," a woman's voice whispered on the other end. "This is Betty, the housekeeper at the Blackwell residence." "Betty, how did you get my number?" "I took it from Mr. Edwards' office," the woman explained, still speaking softly. "Mrs. Dorothy asked me to call. She really wants to talk to you, but she can't use the phone. Mr. Edward controls everything." Amanda felt a chill run down her spine. "What's going on in that house, Betty?" There was a tense pause. "I can't say much. I've worked here for 30 years, ever since Mrs. Dorothy and Mr. Richard got married. Things changed after he passed." Betty hesitated. "Mrs. Dorothy wants to meet you tomorrow. She'll be at Central Park at 10 in the morning near the lake. She'll slip away during her morning walk with the physical therapist." "Betty, does Mrs. Dorothy really have dementia?" Amanda asked, growing more concerned. "I can't say anymore. Please come tomorrow." The call ended abruptly. Amanda sat motionless, still holding the phone. The situation was getting stranger and more unsettling by the minute. She considered ignoring the request and simply calling Edward to decline the job, but the image of Mrs. Dorothy, vulnerable and frightened, wouldn't leave her mind. That night Amanda barely slept. Her mind was full of questions and worries. What was really happening at the Blackwell mansion? Why did Mrs. Dorothy seem so afraid in her son's presence? And why would Betty risk her job to make that mysterious call? The next morning, Amanda arrived at Central Park half an hour early. She sat on a bench overlooking the lake, watching every passerby carefully. By 10:15, she began to think no one would come. That's when she spotted Mrs. Dorothy walking slowly beside a younger woman she assumed was the physical therapist. The elderly woman looked different today, more alert, her gaze sharp and attentive. She wore a simple yet elegant dress and the same golden brooch Amanda had seen in her purse the day before. Mrs. Dorothy said something to the therapist, who nodded and stepped away, sitting on a nearby bench while the older woman continued walking alone. With surprisingly steady steps for someone who had seemed so frail the day before, Mrs. Dorothy approached Amanda. "You came," she said with a genuine smile. "I knew I could trust you." "Mrs. Dorothy, what's going on?" Amanda asked, confused by the woman's transformation. "You seem different," Mrs. Dorothy finished, her eyes twinkling with amusement. "Less confused, perhaps?" "Yes, exactly." The elderly woman glanced around, making sure the therapist was far enough away, then sat beside Amanda. "My dear, I need to tell you a story, and I need your help," she said, gripping Amanda's hands tightly. "But first, I must know, did Edward offer you a job, didn't he?" "Yes, as your private nurse. And did you accept?" "I haven't answered yet," Amanda admitted. "Something felt off." Mrs. Dorothy smiled, looking pleased. "Your instincts are good. Now listen carefully, we don't have much time. The elderly woman took a deep breath and began speaking in a soft, clear voice. I don't have dementia, Amanda. I never did. It was an act. An act? Amanda repeated, shocked. But why? To find someone I could trust, Mrs. Dorothy replied simply. Someone who would help me out of genuine compassion, not because they were after the Blackwell family money. Amanda looked at the elderly woman with a mix of confusion and admiration. So all that in the subway was partly planned. I really did leave home without permission, but I wasn't lost. I was looking for help, for someone like you. Mrs. Dorothy squeezed Amanda's hands tighter. My son is trying to have me permanently committed to a facility upstate. He's sold several family properties without my knowledge, drained bank accounts, and is trying to have me declared mentally incompetent. The revelation left Amanda speechless for a moment. But why? You're rich. Mrs. Dorothy finished with a sad sigh. Yes, very. My husband Richard left a considerable fortune, and most of it is in my name. Edward has always been ambitious, but in recent years, since his father's death, he's become different. Obsessed with money and power. Mrs. Dorothy glanced at the physical therapist, who kept checking her watch. We don't have much time. I have a plan, but I need your help. Richard, always suspicious of our son's character, set up a secret fund for my protection. I can only access it in person, with documents hidden in the house. If Edward has me committed, I'll never get them back. How can I help? Amanda asked, increasingly drawn into the astonishing story. Take the job, earn Edward's trust, and help me retrieve the documents and evidence we need. Mrs. Dorothy smiled with a determination that was striking for someone her age. In return, I promise you'll never have to worry about money again for the rest of your life. The offer was tempting but also frightening. Getting involved in a family conflict of this magnitude could be dangerous. Mrs. Dorothy, this is too risky. Why not go to the police or a lawyer? My son has powerful connections. Any official move would be blocked before it even started. Besides, her voice trembled for the first time. He's my son. I don't want to destroy him. Just stop him. Amanda noticed the physical therapist growing restless, checking her watch repeatedly. I have to go, Mrs. Dorothy said, standing gracefully. Betty will contact you again with more details. Please, Amanda, think about my request. You may be my only hope. The elderly woman walked away with firm steps, rejoining the therapist. Before turning to leave, she gave Amanda one last meaningful look. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. For the rest of the day, Amanda couldn't stop thinking about Mrs. Dorothy's proposal. On one hand, she feared getting into a potentially dangerous situation. On the other, she couldn't ignore the plea of an elderly woman possibly being exploited by her own son. That evening, she received a call from Edward. Amanda, I hope I'm not disturbing you, he said in his carefully polite tone. I wanted to know if you've made a decision about our offer. Amanda took a deep breath, remembering Mrs. Dorothy's pleading gaze. Yes, Mr. Blackwell, I accept the job. Excellent. Satisfaction was evident in his voice. Can you start tomorrow? I'll prepare your contract and arrange a room for you. Tomorrow would be perfect, Amanda replied, feeling a mix of apprehension and determination. What time should I arrive? At 9 in the morning. I can hardly wait to introduce you officially to my mother. I'm sure you two will get along very well. After hanging up, Amanda received another call, again from the unknown number. You accepted, said Betty without preamble. Mrs. Dorothy will be relieved. Betty, what exactly am I getting into? Asked Amanda, her voice betraying her anxiety. Something dangerous but necessary, replied the maid frankly. I've worked for this family for decades. I've seen Mrs. Dorothy and Mr. Richard build not just an empire, but also help thousands through their charity work. And I've watched Edward slowly destroy that legacy after his father's death. And why do you stay? To protect her. Me, Robert the gardener, and a few other long-time staff. We're the only ones she can trust. What exactly is Edward planning? Betty hesitated before answering. There's a psychiatric clinic in the Hamptons, exclusive, discreet, and very expensive. The kind of place where wealthy families send inconvenient relatives to be forgotten. Edward has already started the process to commit her there permanently. A chill ran down Amanda's spine. How can he do that? Mrs. Dorothy is perfectly lucid. He's been manipulating doctors to diagnose her with advanced dementia. He's been altering her medication to make her confused and disoriented during appointments. And he's been gradually restricting her contact with the outside world, isolating her from old friends who might notice the truth. That's horrible, Amanda murmured. That's why we need you, an outsider, someone with medical knowledge who can help prove Mrs. Dorothy is mentally sound, and someone Edward won't suspect yet. What should I do when I arrive tomorrow? Just observe and earn Edward's trust. Don't let on that you know the truth. Act normal. Mrs. Dorothy will keep up her act of mental confusion around him. We'll talk more once you're in the house. After hanging up, Amanda sat on her bed thinking about what she'd just agreed to. It was risky, possibly illegal, but she felt it was the right thing to do. After all, she couldn't abandon Mrs. Dorothy when she needed help the most. The next morning, Amanda arrived promptly at the Blackwell mansion. She brought only a suitcase, with her essential clothes and belongings, leaving the rest in her apartment. Edward greeted her personally, looking exceptionally pleased. "Welcome to your new home, Amanda," he said, leading her through the grand foyer. "At least temporarily. I hope you'll be comfortable here." "Thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Blackwell," Amanda replied politely. "Please, Edward," he insisted, offering a smile that didn't reach his cold eyes. "Consider yourself part of the family now." Betty appeared to show Amanda her room, strategically located near Mrs. Dorothy's. It was spacious and elegant, far more luxurious than her modest apartment. "Meals are served downstairs at 8 a.m., 1 p.m. and 7 p.m., Betty explained in a normal tone while straightening the bed sheets. Then, lowering her voice to a near whisper, she added, "Security cameras cover almost the entire house, except bedrooms and bathrooms. Be careful what you say in common areas." Amanda nodded subtly, understanding the gravity of the situation. After unpacking, she was formally introduced to Mrs. Dorothy, who sat in the garden, seemingly absorbed in a book. When she saw Amanda, the elderly woman wore the same confused expression she'd shown on the subway. "Mother," Edward said loudly and slowly, as if speaking to a child, "this is Amanda, your new nurse. Do you remember her? She helped you yesterday." Mrs. Dorothy looked at Amanda with vacant eyes. "Nurse, I'm not sick, Richard." "I'm not Richard, Mom. I'm Edward, your son," he corrected with a theatrical sigh for Amanda's benefit. "Dad isn't with us anymore, remember?" A brief flash of genuine pain crossed Mrs. Dorothy's face, and Amanda noticed that despite the act, mentioning her late husband still affected her deeply. "Yes, of course. I'm sorry, dear," the elderly woman replied, turning her attention to Amanda. "You have kind eyes, young lady. What was your name again?" "Amanda, Mrs. Dorothy. I'll be helping you with your daily routine." "That's nice. I really do need company. This house is so big and quiet now," Edward interjected. "Amanda will be with you full-time, Mom, to make sure you don't wander off again. She'll also monitor your medication and help with anything you need." He turned to Amanda. "Here's the list of medications she needs to take with the exact times. It's absolutely crucial they're given exactly as prescribed." Amanda took the list, noting the names of several powerful psychotropics with dosages that seemed excessively high for an elderly person. "Does a doctor regularly check on Mrs. Dorothy's condition?" she asked professionally. "Dr. Williams comes every week. He's a specialist in geriatrics and dementia," Edward replied promptly. "If you have any questions about the medication, you can speak directly to me. I prefer to handle these decisions." "I understand. And her daily routine?" "Quite simple. Mom likes to spend mornings in the garden, then lunch, a short nap in the afternoon, maybe a walk on the grounds if she's up for it, and an early dinner. No strong emotions or upsetting news," he emphasized the last words. "What matters is keeping things calm and predictable." "It's better this way," Mrs. Dorothy interjected unexpectedly, her gaze distant. "At my age, surprises are rarely good." Edward smiled, pleased with his mother's apparent compliance. "I see you two will get along well. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a video conference in 10 minutes. Amanda, for any emergencies, my number is on speed dial on all the house phones. When Edward left, Amanda sat beside Mrs. Dorothy, keeping up a casual conversation about the garden and flowers, aware they might be watched. The elderly woman replied with vague, occasionally disjointed remarks, perfectly maintaining her act. It was only at night, when the lights went out and the house fell silent, that Amanda heard a soft knock at her door. It was Betty, carrying a tray with tea. "I thought you might like something warm before bed," she said aloud, entering the room. Then she whispered, "Mrs. Dorothy is waiting for you in her room. There's a passage connecting her closet to your bathroom. Go in 15 minutes when Edward is on his nightly call with the overseas investors." Exactly 15 minutes later, Amanda followed the instructions, finding a hidden door at the back of her bathroom that led to a small hallway and then to Mrs. Dorothy's closet. The elderly woman was waiting in a comfortable armchair, looking far more alert and determined than in her daytime performance. "Finally, we can speak openly," Mrs. Dorothy said, gesturing to a nearby chair. "This is one of the few truly private places in the house. My husband insisted on building secret passages when we renovated the mansion. He valued privacy above all else." "You're taking a big risk bringing me here," Amanda remarked. "A necessary risk," the elderly woman replied firmly. "Did you see the medication list Edward gave you?" "Yes, the dosages are extremely high. If you actually took all of that, I'd be permanently sedated and confused." "Exactly the state he needs to declare me mentally incompetent," concluded Mrs. Dorothy. "Betty and Robert have been replacing the pills for months. It's the only reason I can still think clearly." "What exactly does your son intend to do?" Mrs. Dorothy's expression hardened. "Take legal control of everything. The fortune, the businesses, the charitable foundations. Everything Richard and I built over decades. He's already sold 3 historic family properties without my true consent, using documents with forged signatures. And you can't just confront him. If I confront him openly, he'll only speed up his plans. The clinic in the Hamptons is already prepared to receive me in case of emergency. All it would take is a fabricated crisis, a supposed violent episode or an escape attempt, and I'd be committed immediately, with no chance to defend myself." "That's terrible," murmured Amanda, growing more horrified by the situation. "That's why we must act with intelligence, not haste," said Mrs. Dorothy, her voice showing impressive determination. "Richard always said patience was our greatest weapon in business. The same applies here." The elderly woman stood and walked to a painting on the wall, a portrait of her with her late husband. Moving it carefully, she revealed a small built-in safe. "The documents we need are here, but we can't take them yet. Edward conducts regular inventories of valuables in the house. We must wait for the right moment." "And when will that be?" "Next week. There's an important shareholder meeting in New York City. Edward will be gone all day. That will be our chance," Mrs. Dorothy explained, carefully closing the painting again. "Until then, you must earn his complete trust. Appear dedicated, efficient, and entirely convinced of my supposed dementia." Amanda nodded, understanding her mission. "Should I keep administering the medication as instructed?" "No. Betty will continue replacing them with placebos. But you must pretend I'm taking everything properly. Occasionally mention to Edward how I'm responding well to the medication, how I'm calmer and more docile." The conversation was interrupted by a soft knock at the door, a signal from Betty that it was time for Amanda to return to her room. "Go now," whispered Mrs. Dorothy, squeezing Amanda's hands gratefully. "And remember, in this house the walls have ears and the mirrors have eyes." The following days were an exercise in constant acting. Amanda followed the established routine for Mrs. Dorothy, pretending to administer the medication on schedule, reporting to Edward about his mother's gradual behavioral improvement. The elderly woman, in turn, continued her flawless performance as a fragile, confused woman, occasionally calling her son by her late husband's name or asking repetitive questions about past events. Edward seemed increasingly pleased with the situation, showing growing confidence in Amanda. During dinners, he often discussed business on the phone, casually mentioning high-value transactions, completely certain his mother didn't understand what was happening. One such evening, after Mrs. Dorothy had retired to her room, Edward invited Amanda for a drink in the library. "I'm truly impressed with your work," he said, pouring her a glass of expensive wine. "Mother seems much more manageable since you arrived." "Thank you, sir. I'm just doing my job," Amanda replied with studied modesty. "You know, it wasn't always like this," Edward mused, contemplating his glass. "Mother used to be a force of nature, intelligent, determined, even ruthless. Richard, my father, was the public face of the company, but often she was the one making the tough decisions." The almost nostalgic tone in Edward's voice surprised Amanda. "It seems your mother was a remarkable woman." "She was, no doubt," he agreed, a strange gleam in his eyes. "Until she decided our family fortune should be shared with the less fortunate. Do you know what that means in the business world? Weakness, vulnerability, an easy target for unscrupulous competitors." The bitterness in his voice was palpable. "We built an empire from nothing, and she wanted to hand it out like candy at a child's party. After my father died, she got even worse. Wanted to donate half our properties, set up foundations, slash profit margins in favor of social responsibility." He practically spat the last words. Someone had to protect the Blackwell legacy, even from herself. Amanda kept her expression neutral, though inwardly shocked by Edward's cold calculation. "I imagine it must be hard to see her like this," she ventured carefully. Edward smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "The most ironic part, that dementia diagnosis started as a simple excuse, a convenient way to explain why the Blackwell family matriarch suddenly vanished from social events. But you know how doctors are. Pay them enough and they'll find exactly what you want them to find." He leaned closer, lowering his voice as if sharing a secret. "Between us, I think, she really did start developing some form of dementia. Maybe the constant suggestion became reality. Fascinating, don't you think?" Amanda felt a chill but forced a small, understanding smile. The human mind is truly complex. "Indeed," Edward agreed, settling back in his chair. "Enjoy the wine, Amanda. It's an exceptionally rare Bordeaux from my father's private collection. One of the many things Mother tried to donate to a charity auction before I stepped in." The rest of the conversation revolved around pleasantries, with Edward occasionally asking personal questions, as if sizing her up. Amanda replied with carefully crafted half-truths, revealing just enough to seem sincere but never too much. By the time she finally retreated to her room, Amanda was mentally exhausted from the strain of maintaining her act. She found Betty waiting for her. "He's testing you," the housekeeper warned in a low voice. "He did the same with the 3 nurses before you." 3? Amanda couldn't hide her surprise. "I didn't know there were others before me." "None. Lasted more than a month. One quit because the situation felt too strange. The other 2 were fired by Edward when they started asking questions about the medication," Betty explained. "None of them got as far as you." The revelation brought Amanda no comfort, only heightened her sense of danger. The next night, during her secret meeting with Mrs. Dorothy, Amanda shared details of her conversation with Edward. "He practically confessed to manipulating her diagnosis," she concluded, outraged. Mrs. Dorothy didn't seem surprised. "Edward has always been too confident. It's his greatest weakness," she remarked with the wisdom of decades observing her own son. "Richard noticed it early. That's why he set safeguards in his will." "What kind of safeguards?" "An independent trust managed by an old family friend. Enough money to protect me if needed and keep the charitable foundations running separately from Blackwell Construction," the elderly woman explained. "And most importantly, documents proving my mental competence, regularly updated with evaluations from independent doctors. Richard insisted I see in secret." Amanda was impressed by the late patriarch's foresight. "Did your husband suspect this might happen?" "Richard knew the son we had. He loved Edward deeply, but wasn't blind to his flaws. For years, we tried to balance his unchecked ambition with higher values." Mrs. Dorothy's voice wavered slightly. "Clearly, we failed. And these documents are in the safe behind the painting. Some of them, the most important ones, are elsewhere, even more secure." The elderly woman replied, but we can't access them without first retrieving what's here. It's a sort of key, so to speak. I see, and the plan is still to act during the shareholders' meeting? Yes. It's happening in 3 days. Robert has already confirmed. Edward plans to be out all day, Mrs. Dorothy assured. But we must be extremely careful. He'll have security monitoring the cameras remotely. As the day of the operation approached, the tension in the mansion was almost palpable. Amanda continued her diligent act, pretending to administer medication and reporting steady progress. Edward seemed increasingly pleased and confident, even casually mentioning his plans for the shareholders' meeting over breakfast. "It'll be a long but crucial day," he remarked, checking messages on his phone. "We're finalizing the sale of the commercial complex downtown. The very one Mother wanted turned into social housing," he added with an ironic smile. "I'm sure your mother will be just fine under my care," Amanda assured. "Perhaps we could take a walk in the garden. She seems especially fond of the roses." "Excellent idea," Edward agreed. "Mother always had a special connection with those roses. Richard planted them for her when they bought this house. You know, an incurable romantic, my father." For a moment, Amanda glimpsed something almost human in Edward's expression, a genuine longing for his father, perhaps. But it vanished quickly, replaced by his usual mask of calculated efficiency. On the morning of the big day, Edward left early, impeccable in his Italian suit, giving final instructions to security and Amanda. "I'll be unreachable most of the day, but Frank will be on standby if there's any emergency," he said, referring to the head of security. "And remember, no visitors, no phone calls for Mother. Her emotional state is too fragile for disruptions to her routine." "I understand perfectly," Amanda assured. "Have a good meeting." The moment Edward's car disappeared through the main gate, the plan went into motion. Betty and Robert had already laid the groundwork, creating small distractions for the remaining guards. Amanda went to Mrs. Dorothy's room, finding her already dressed and alert. "We must be quick," the elderly woman said, moving with surprising agility for her age. "Robert is causing an electrical issue that will disable the east hallway. Cameras for exactly 7 minutes." Together they headed to the master bedroom, where Mrs. Dorothy removed the painting and opened the safe with a memorized combination. From inside, she retrieved a sealed envelope and a small electronic device. "That's it?" Amanda asked, surprised by the seemingly insignificant size of the item. "This is only the beginning," Mrs. Dorothy replied, tucking the items into her clothing. "Now, we move to phase 2. Following another hallway, they reached a door leading to a rarely used service staircase. They descended to the mansion's basement, a place Amanda hadn't even known existed. "The house was built in the 1920s, Mrs. Dorothy explained, as they walked. "During the Civil War, the original owner created these tunnels as an escape route. Richard kept them intact when we bought the place, though very few people know they exist." At the end of the underground hallway, they reached a small room that looked like an old archive. Mrs. Dorothy used a key hidden in the envelope to open a seemingly ordinary cabinet, revealing another safe behind a false wall. "Edward never discovered this place," she said with a small triumphant smile. "Even as a child, he never had the patience to explore the darker corners of the house." From the safe, Mrs. Dorothy pulled out a thick folder and a digital storage device. "Here's everything. Independent medical records proving my sanity, original documents for the properties Edward sold illegally, records of unauthorized bank transfers and Richard's complete will, with all the clauses Edward tried to hide from me." Amanda flipped through some of the documents, impressed by the breadth and detail of the evidence. "With this, you could easily dismiss any claims of mental incapacity and prove your son's fraudulent actions." "Yes, I could destroy him completely," Mrs. Dorothy replied, a shadow of sadness in her eyes. "But that's not what I want." "I don't understand. After everything he's done—" "He's my son, Amanda," the elderly woman interrupted firmly. "The only child Richard and I ever had. Despite all his mistakes, I can't just erase him from my life or send him to prison." "Then what's the plan?" "Confront him with enough evidence to stop him but offer him a way out. A chance at redemption, no matter how unlikely it seems," Mrs. Dorothy explained. "Richard always believed even the most misguided people deserve an opportunity to change." Amanda admired the older woman's compassion, though she wasn't sure she shared her optimism about Edward's potential for redemption. With the essential documents secured, they returned to the upper floors of the house, carefully avoiding security cameras using the routes Robert had planned. Back in Mrs. Dorothy's room, they hid the evidence in a secret compartment beneath the floorboards, concealed by a heavy rug. "The hardest part is done," Mrs. Dorothy said, visibly exhausted from the effort but with eyes gleaming with determination. "Now, we need to prepare the next step." The rest of the day passed with apparent normalcy. Amanda accompanied Mrs. Dorothy through her usual routine, including a walk in the garden where they were casually photographed by one of the guards, visual proof that nothing out of the ordinary had happened during Edward's absence. When he returned late that night, he looked tired but satisfied. The meeting was a complete success, he announced during a brief encounter with Amanda in the library. "The new investors are impressed with our expansionist vision." "How was your day with Mother?" "Quiet," Amanda replied with her best professional smile. "We followed the usual routine, no incidents." "Perfect." Edward poured himself a drink. "I knew I could trust you, Amanda. Some people are naturally loyal, aren't they? It's a rare and valuable trait these days." The comment, dripping with unintentional irony, nearly made Amanda falter, but she kept her expression neutral. "I just try to do my job as well as possible." "And you do it admirably well," he said, raising his glass in a silent toast. "In fact, I have news that might interest you. I was thinking of making your position here more permanent. A long-term contract, let's say, with a significant raise." "That's very generous of you," Amanda replied, aware of the trap hidden beneath the seemingly benevolent offer. "Actually, it'll be more than just an employment contract," Edward continued, his calculating eyes studying Amanda's reactions. "I'm considering setting up a more institutional care structure for Mother, a dedicated medical team in a controlled environment, and I'd like you to oversee everything." "You mean a clinic?" "I call it a therapeutic retreat," he corrected with a cold smile. "A peaceful place in the Hamptons where Mother can receive the best care, far from the stress of the city. I'm finalizing the paperwork this week." Amanda felt a chill, realizing Edward's plan was moving faster than they had anticipated. "Wouldn't the move be too disruptive for her?" she asked, trying to buy time. "That's why I want you there," he replied, leaning forward. "To ensure a smooth transition, Mother trusts you, which is invaluable at this stage." The conversation was interrupted by Betty announcing that dinner was served. Amanda seized the opportunity to excuse herself, claiming she needed to check on Mrs. Dorothy before eating. "He's speeding up the plans," she informed the elderly woman, finding her in her room. "He mentioned finalizing the paperwork this week." Mrs. Dorothy didn't seem surprised. "The meeting must have given him the financial security he needed to move forward. We'll have to act sooner than expected." "When?" "Tomorrow," the elderly woman decided firmly. "We already have everything we need. Waiting longer will only increase the risks." That night, after everyone had retired, Mrs. Dorothy, Amanda, Betty, and Robert gathered secretly to finalize the details of their plan. The tension was palpable, but there was also a shared sense of determination, fueled by the respect they all held for Mrs. Dorothy and their desire to preserve the true legacy of the Blackwell family. The next morning, Amanda carried out the usual routine, pretending to administer Mrs. Dorothy's medications, which had now been regularly replaced with harmless placebos. After breakfast, during which Edward had been absorbed in his tablet reviewing documents, he announced he needed to step out briefly for a meeting with his lawyer. "It shouldn't take more than 2 hours," he told Amanda. "Keep Mother in her normal routine." "Of course," she assured him, exchanging a discreet glance with Betty. As soon as Edward's car left the property, Mrs. Dorothy abandoned her usual performance of frailty. With steady steps and a clear mind, she headed to her private office, which Edward had practically shut down months ago. "Call him," she instructed Amanda, sitting behind the imposing oak desk that had been her workspace for decades. "Tell him it's urgent." Amanda picked up the phone and dialed Edward, following the exact script they had prepared. "Mr. Blackwell, I'm sorry to bother you, but something strange is happening. Your mother is different. She insisted on going to the office and is now sitting there looking completely lucid. She's demanding to speak with you urgently." There was a long silence on the other end, followed by a tense question. "What exactly is she saying?" "She mentioned something about documents and the name of the lawyer Arthur Thompson," Amanda replied, referring to Richard's old friend and trusted attorney whom Edward had pushed out after his father's death. The information had the intended effect. Edward announced he would return immediately, his voice betraying poorly concealed alarm. Less than 30 minutes later, Edward's car screeched to a halt at the mansion's entrance. He hurried inside, brushing past the security guard who tried to update him on the situation. When he entered the office, he found not only his mother sitting upright behind the desk, but also Amanda at her side, with Robert and Betty positioned discreetly near the door. "What is this? Some kind of intervention?" he asked with a forced smile, struggling to maintain his composure. "Sit down, Edward." Mrs. Dorothy's voice rang with authority, a tone Amanda had never heard before. "We have serious matters to discuss. Mom, you should be resting. You're clearly having a moment of temporary lucidity, which is common for patients with your condition," Edward tried, shooting an accusatory glance at Amanda. "And you, I thought I'd made myself clear about following medical protocol." "There is no legitimate medical protocol, Mr. Blackwell," Amanda replied firmly, "just as there is no legitimate dementia diagnosis." Edward's face paled slightly, but he held his defensive stance. "I don't know what she's told you, but my mother suffers from progressive dementia, diagnosed by renowned specialists. I have all the reports." "Falsified reports," Mrs. Dorothy interjected, sliding a folder across the desk, "just like the forged authorizations for the sale of the properties on Fifth Avenue and Greenwich Village." "This is absurd," Edward dismissed the accusations with an impatient wave. "You signed all those authorizations, Mum. Maybe you don't remember, which only proves my point about your condition." "I never signed anything." Mrs. Dorothy's voice was calm but unrelenting. "And I have undeniable proof." She opened another folder, revealing documents with official handwriting analyses proving the forgery of her signature on multiple papers. "This could be manipulated," Edward argued, though his confidence visibly wavered. "Just like the prescriptions," Amanda challenged, presenting a tablet displaying emails exchanged between Edward and a doctor, explicitly discussing the manipulation of diagnoses and prescriptions. Edward's face flickered between pale and flushed as his eyes darted frantically, calculating his options. "I don't know what you think you're doing, but this is clearly a conspiracy," he snapped, raising his voice. "Amanda, you're fired. Betty and Robert, pack your things and leave this house immediately. As for you, Mom..." He hesitated, realizing the tactical mistake he was about to make. "As for me," Mrs. Dorothy challenged, raising an eyebrow. "Are you going to threaten me with institutionalization now, Edward? In front of witnesses?" The silence that followed was deafening. Edward looked like a cornered animal, torn between aggression and cold calculation. "You don't understand what's at stake," he finally said, shifting tactics. "Everything I did was to protect the family legacy. You were wasting millions on social projects with no return. You were weakening the company Dad built with so much sacrifice." "Your father built more than a company, Edward," Mrs. Dorothy replied, her voice heavy with sadness. "He built a legacy of integrity and social responsibility. The projects you despise saved lives, educated children, gave dignity to abandoned seniors." "Sentimentalism that costs money," he shot back bitterly. "In the real world, business is business." "And family is family," Mrs. Dorothy finished, her tone softening. "You're my son, Edward, my only son. Despite everything you've done, I still remember the sensitive boy you once were, before ambition consumed everything else." For a moment, Edward seemed disarmed by the unexpectedly emotional approach. "This changes nothing," he said, though with less conviction. "You can't prove these accusations in court." "Actually, I can," Mrs. Dorothy countered, opening a drawer and retrieving an external hard drive. "Your father was extremely meticulous with his records, and I, as you well know, have always been responsible for the actual financial management of our companies. Every unauthorized transfer, every forged document, every conspiracy with unscrupulous doctors, everything is here. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, Don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. Edward's face lost all its color. For the first time, Amanda saw genuine fear in his eyes. "What do you want then? Money?" he asked, turning to Amanda with barely contained anger. "Is that what she promised you? A cut of the family fortune? I want my son back," Mrs. Dorothy replied before Amanda could answer. "I want the man Richard and I raised, not this version corrupted by greed. But if that's not possible, I'm prepared to take legal action." "You'd destroy me? Your own son?" "You left me no choice, Edward. You planned to force me into a clinic, drug me into insanity, all for money." The silence that followed was heavy, laden with decades of broken expectations and diverging paths. Finally, Edward spoke, his voice eerily calm. "What's the alternative then? Some elaborate redemption plan where I confess my sins and everything goes back to how it was?" "No, nothing will go back to how it was," Mrs. Dorothy said firmly. "But I'm willing to offer a different path, a complete restructuring of our businesses and foundations. You'll remain CEO, but under the supervision of an independent board. Half the profits will go to the social causes your father and I always championed, and you'll seek professional help for your obsession with control and money. And if I refuse, then I have no choice but to use this evidence," she replied, gesturing to the documents spread across the table. "The outcome would be devastating for you, not just financially, but personally. Your name would be permanently tarnished, and you'd likely face criminal charges." Edward laughed, a humorless sound. "It's almost poetic. You're threatening me with the same coercion you accuse me of using." "The difference is, I never wanted to harm you," Mrs. Dorothy said softly. "Only to stop you before you destroyed everything, including yourself." A long moment of tension followed, during which Amanda felt she was witnessing a silent battle of wills between mother and son, the culmination of years of unresolved conflict and clashing expectations. When Edward finally spoke, his voice was controlled, almost professional. "I need time to consider your proposal." "You have 48 hours, Mrs. Dorothy replied, matching his businesslike tone. "During that time, I'll remain in this house with Amanda as my personal assistant. Betty and Robert will stay in their positions, and you won't attempt to contact anyone outside about this matter. Are we clear?" Edward nodded stiffly, clearly unaccustomed to being on the losing side of a negotiation. "Perfectly, Mother." As he left the office, Amanda couldn't help but admire Mrs. Dorothy's complete transformation. From a seemingly frail, confused elderly woman to a formidable businesswoman with the natural authority of someone who'd spent decades building and managing an empire. "You were incredible," she remarked, unable to contain her admiration. Mrs. Dorothy smiled wearily. "Years of tough negotiations with men who underestimated women in power prepared me well for this moment," she replied, finally allowing herself to relax slightly. "Though no negotiation was ever as painful as confronting my own son." The next 48 hours were marked by controlled tension in the Blackwell mansion. Edward isolated himself in his private wing, emerging only for silent meals during which he barely exchanged a word with anyone. Amanda remained vigilant, fearing he might attempt some desperate maneuver, but Mrs. Dorothy seemed strangely calm, as if she had finally regained control of her life after months of forced pretense. On the afternoon of the second day, Edward requested a private meeting with his mother. Amanda initially hesitated to leave them alone, but Mrs. Dorothy reassured her. "He won't try anything physical. That was never his style," she said with the confidence of someone who knew her son's methods deeply. "And in any case, Robert will be right outside the door." The meeting lasted over 3 hours. When it finally ended, Mrs. Dorothy called Amanda to her room. "We've reached an agreement," she announced, looking both exhausted and relieved. "It wasn't easy, and I have no illusions that Edward has magically changed his personality, but we've established a viable path forward. Did he accept all your conditions?" "With some modifications. He'll retain operational control of the businesses, but all major strategic and financial decisions will require approval from a board that includes me and Dr. Arthur Thompson, the family's former lawyer," Mrs. Dorothy explained. As for the charitable foundations, they'll not only remain but expand, with a guaranteed budget proportional to annual profits. And what about the personal situation between you? Mrs. Dorothy sighed deeply. That will take more time. Forgiveness is one thing. Rebuilding trust is entirely different. Edward agreed to seek therapy, though he made it clear he's only doing so as part of our agreement. Do you think he can really change? Honestly, I don't know, Mrs. Dorothy replied with surprising frankness. Richard always believed our son had goodness in him, just buried deep under layers of ambition and insecurity. I want to believe my husband was right. In the days that followed, the Blackwell mansion underwent a gradual transformation. The security team was reduced, surveillance cameras in private spaces were deactivated, and Mrs. Dorothy slowly resumed her position as the true head of the household. Edward, for his part, kept his distance, focused on implementing the agreed-upon administrative changes. Occasionally, Amanda caught him watching his mother with a complex expression, a mix of resentment, reluctant admiration, and something that might even have been remorse. 2 weeks after the confrontation, Mrs. Dorothy invited Amanda for a walk in the garden. "You've changed my life, my dear," the elderly woman said as they admired the roses Richard had planted decades earlier. "Without your courage and compassion, I'd probably be in some remote clinic truly losing my mind." "You would have found another way," Amanda replied modestly. "Your determination is inspiring." "Perhaps. But the fact is, you were the one who appeared when I needed help the most." Mrs. Dorothy stopped walking and turned to face Amanda directly. "And for that, I want to offer you something in return. You don't need to give me anything. Helping you was the right thing to do." "Even so, I insist," Mrs. Dorothy smiled. "As you know, beyond our businesses, our family oversees several charitable foundations. The most important is the Blackwell Foundation for Vulnerable Seniors, which provides dignified care and social integration programs for elderly individuals without family or resources." Amanda nodded, remembering having read about the institution during her initial research on the family. "The foundation is in need of a new executive director, someone with a background in healthcare, but above all, with genuine compassion and unquestionable integrity," Mrs. Dorothy continued. "I'd like to offer you the position." The proposal caught Amanda completely by surprise. "Me? But I don't have administrative experiences." "You have something far more important. The right heart for this work," insisted Mrs. Dorothy. "Administrative experience can be learned. Character and compassion are innate qualities." The offer was tempting. Meaningful work, well paid, making a difference in the lives of vulnerable people. Everything Amanda had ever wanted in her career. "You don't have to answer now," added Mrs. Dorothy, noticing Amanda's hesitation. "Think it over. The position will be available when you decide." That evening, as she reflected on the proposal in her room, Amanda was startled by a knock at her door. It was Edward, looking uncomfortable and slightly embarrassed, an expression she'd never seen on his face before. "May I come in for a moment?" he asked, his tone politely neutral. Amanda hesitated but eventually agreed, leaving the door open as a precaution. "I heard my mother offered you the directorship of the foundation," said Edward, standing near the entrance. "I came to say that despite our past differences, I fully support this decision." The comment surprised Amanda. "Thank you. I didn't expect your support. I believe you've shown rare qualities in caring for my mother," he continued, choosing his words carefully. "Loyalty, integrity, courage, even if those qualities were directed against me," he added with a faint, ironic smile. There was an awkward silence before Edward went on. "I also came to apologize for how I treated you. I used you as a pawn in a game I never should have started." Amanda studied his face, searching for signs of manipulation, but for the first time Edward seemed genuinely sincere. "I appreciate your apology," she replied cautiously. "I don't expect your forgiveness or trust," he said, already turning to leave. "I just wanted you to know that whatever you decide about the position, you have my respect." After he left, Amanda remained thoughtful. The brief but meaningful interaction suggested that perhaps, just perhaps, there was hope for the fractured relationship between mother and son. 3 months later, the Blackwell Foundation for Vulnerable Seniors inaugurated its new headquarters, a spacious and welcoming property in the Beacon Hill neighborhood. Amanda, now officially its executive director, personally oversaw every detail, from hiring the medical staff to scheduling cultural activities for the residents. Mrs. Dorothy, restored to her position as family matriarch and chair of the Blackwell Enterprises Board, took an active role in the foundation's daily life, often sitting down simply to chat with the seniors, sharing stories and experiences. During the inauguration ceremony, where influential figures from New York City and representatives of social organizations gathered, Amanda was surprised to see Edward arrive. He looked different, less rigid, though he still carried his characteristic elegant poise. "Everything looks magnificent," he remarked, approaching Amanda. "You've turned my mother's vision into something tangible and impressive." "It was a collective effort," she replied diplomatically. "Your mother has brilliant ideas. They just needed practical implementation." "And genuine dedication," Edward added, his gaze sweeping over the welcoming space. "Something I see you have in abundance." Before Amanda could respond, they were interrupted by Mrs. Dorothy, who approached leaning lightly on an elegant cane, not out of physical need but as a symbol of the status she had reclaimed. "I see my two favorite projects are talking," she remarked with an enigmatic smile. "Projects?" Amanda asked, confused. "The foundation," explained Mrs. Dorothy, gesturing to the space around them. "And my son's rehabilitation," she concluded, casting a tender yet firm glance at Edward. The remark brought an almost imperceptible flush to Edward's usually stoic face. "Mum has always been too direct for the corporate world," he remarked, though without real irritation in his voice. "Life is too short for games, my son," Mrs. Dorothy replied. "If I've learned anything these past few months, it's that." For the rest of the ceremony, Amanda observed the interaction between mother and son. Still cautious, certainly not entirely harmonious, but undeniably transformed compared to the tense days of a few months prior. In a quiet moment, after most guests had left, Mrs. Dorothy approached Amanda again as she was organizing the final details before closing the foundation for the night. "I have something for you," the elderly woman said, handing her a small velvet box. When Amanda opened it, she found the golden brooch Mrs. Dorothy had worn the day they met on the subway. "I can't accept this. It's a family heirloom," Amanda protested. "That's exactly why you should take it," Mrs. Dorothy insisted gently. "This brooch belonged to my grandmother, then my mother, and finally to me. Richard gave it to me on our wedding day after secretly buying it from my mother." "But it should go to someone in the family." "And it is," Mrs. Dorothy interrupted firmly. "Family isn't just about blood ties, Amanda. It's about who stands by you in your hardest moments, who risks everything to protect you when you're vulnerable." Amanda's eyes filled with unexpected tears. "Even so, please," Mrs. Dorothy's voice was kind but resolute, "it would honor me if you accepted it. Consider it not just a thank you, but a symbol of the family we choose, not just the one we're born into." Deeply moved, Amanda finally accepted the gift, allowing Mrs. Dorothy to pin it to her blouse. "It looks perfect on you," the older woman remarked with satisfaction. "Now, shall we? Edward promised to take us to dinner at that Italian restaurant you mentioned liking." "He did?" Amanda asked, surprised by the thoughtful gesture from Edward. "Small steps, my dear," Mrs. Dorothy replied with a knowing smile. "Redemption rarely comes in grand, dramatic gestures. More often, it's in little moments of consideration and kindness." As they left the foundation together, Amanda reflected on the extraordinary journey that had begun in that crowded subway car when she noticed an elderly woman who seemed lost. What had seemed like a simple act of kindness had turned into a complete revolution in her life, bringing not just professional security and purpose, but also a family connection she never expected to find. Mrs. Dorothy, as if reading her thoughts, gently squeezed her arm. "You know what Richard always said? That life's best encounters are the ones that seem like coincidences, but are actually inevitable meetings between souls who need each other." Looking down at the brooch on her blouse, a symbol of acceptance and belonging, Amanda knew her. Life had been permanently changed by that seemingly random moment on the subway, the moment she decided to help a lost elderly woman and ended up finding her own path in the process. The end. And you, dear listener, have you ever helped a stranger and received something unexpected in return? Share your experiences in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel for more heartwarming stories.